Firepower and mobility. Those two words have guided the United States Cavalry since they were first combined in battlefield strategy by the likes of Generals Philip H. Sheridan and James H. Wilson. Innovative leaders who saw in the cavalry a means of not only harassing the enemy, but of guaranteeing a decisive victory. By combining the speed and maneuverability of the horse with the firepower of weapons like the Spencer carbine, Wilson and Sheridan would not only advance quickly against the enemy, but were able, for the first time, to hold their positions. Today, when you're talking speed, maneuverability, and firepower, there isn't much that can hold a candle to this bad boy, the AH-64D Apache Longbow. The Apache can fly 170 miles per hour, turn on a dime, and packs massive firepower. A 30mm gun, 70mm rockets, and a selection of Hellfire laser-guided missiles. Welcome to cavalry of the 21st century, first attack style. Now, we didn't magically go from the horse to the Apache. The story of the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment, finds its beginnings in air mobile, the idea of moving troops and fighting the enemy using the helicopter. Officially activated as the 11th Air Assault Division, February 1st, 1963 at Fort Benning, Georgia, the division's charge was to put air mobile to the test, developing tactics to carry out this new form of combat. The 227th Assault Helicopter Battalion was formed 5 months into this evaluation and training process as the helicopter's role in future combat was evolving. The backbone of the new air mobile concept was the venerable Bell UH-1 Iroquois, affectionately known as the Huey by the maintenance crews and the pilots who flew them. The Huey could fly 140 miles per hour and carried a wide variety of armament, including M200 19-tube rocket launchers, M75 40mm grenade launcher, 4 7.62mm machine guns, AGM-22B wire-guided anti-tank missiles, 50 caliber machine guns, and even the M134 minigun. Basically, if it could be bolted to the aircraft, they used it. The rugged bird's design would also add to the Huey's reputation. The aircraft could take a lot of punishment and still return its crews intact. They were also extremely survivable in a crash, as its crews would discover. The Huey carried up to 12 troopers for air mobile deployment, or could carry 6 stretchers with a medical attendant for medevac duty. The Huey's versatility was not merely a credit to its design, but to the crews, who would improvise solutions to the ever-changing combat conditions of the conflict soon to arrive. On July 1st, 1965, the 11th Air Assault Division was reorganized and redesignated an element of the 1st Cavalry Division. Just 1 month later, the 1st Cavalry Division would be sent to Vietnam as the first fully committed division in the Vietnam War. It was Vietnam where the 227th underwent its first baptism of fire, and the air mobile concept went from theory to solid battle-tested strategy. Just 8 days after the first helicopters arrived, the 227th launched its first combat assault, supporting a unit of the 101st Airborne Division. Viet Cong forces had surrounded the airborne unit, and it was the 227th's job to airlift supplies, ammunition, and reinforcements to the surrounded soldiers. Air crews flew wounded troopers to a nearby field hospital and finally extracted the entire unit from the area. It would be the 227th's next engagement, however, that would put the entire regiment's resources to the test in the province of Pleiku. October 23, 1965, on the order of General William Westmoreland, the 227th began an air assault mission to pursue and fight the North Vietnamese Army in a campaign that would stretch across 2,500 square miles of jungle. Troopers of the 1st Brigade and 1st Squadron, 9th Cavalry, descended on the North Vietnamese Army's 33rd Regiment before they could escape from their initial advance on Clay May. The enemy regiment was scattered in the confusion and quickly destroyed. 3rd Brigade, 1st Cavalry joined the fighting on November 9th. 5 days later, the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, air assaulted into the Ya Drang Valley near the Chu Pong Massif, engaging in 3 days of the most intense combat in the division's history. When the Pleiku campaign ended on November 25th, the 227th had airlifted the equivalent of 65 infantry companies and flown a total of 6,066 sorties. During the operation, 2 of 3 regiments in the North Vietnamese Division were destroyed, giving the North Vietnamese Army its first major defeat and earning 1st Cavalry the first presidential unit citation given to a division in Vietnam. In 7 years of continuous operations like Paul Revere II, Jeb Stuart, and Fishhook, in the battles of Binh Thon, Khe Sanh, Cambodia, and many more, the 227th distinguished itself with a host of decorations and honors, including a second Presidential Unit Citation and the first Medal of Honor awarded to an Army aviator during the Vietnam War, Chief Warrant Officer II, Frederick E. Ferguson. January 31, 1968, during celebrations for Tet, the Vietnamese New Year, over 7,000 well-equipped North Vietnamese Army regulars launched a major offensive in an attempt to overrun South Vietnam. Known as the Tet Offensive, the NVA stormed the imperial city of Hue, overwhelming Army of the Republic of Vietnam troops and the U.S. Marines stationed there. 24 hours later, the invaders were joined by 7,000 more NVA reinforcements. In the middle of the Tet Offensive, CW2 Frederick Ferguson, commander of a resupply helicopter, received an emergency call. A downed helicopter crew was under heavy attack in the occupied city of Hue. The crew members were wounded and needed immediate rescue. Despite warnings of heavy anti-aircraft fire, Ferguson began a high-speed, low-level flight toward the isolated South Vietnamese Army compound where the crash survivors had taken refuge. Maintaining his course through intense short-range fire, Ferguson landed in a blinding dust cloud inside the confined compound. While loading the wounded, heavy mortar fire severely damaged Ferguson's aircraft. But despite the damage, Ferguson managed to take off through the continuing hail of mortars, returning his wounded passengers to friendly control. Through his skill and determination, Chief Warrant Officer II Frederick Ferguson saved 5 lives that day. Throughout the conflict, the 227th would continue to take the fight to the enemy and embody their motto, Pourvoir, or can do. On April 19, 1968, Operation Delaware would begin. The goal was to strike what the Viet Cong considered its secure sanctuary in the A Shaw Valley, along the border with Laos. The assault would not only test the helicopter crews, who would fly gauntlets of 50 caliber and 37mm anti-aircraft fire, but also the maintenance crews, who worked through many nights when at one point, 75% of the fleet required maintenance due to damage in combat, along with the inhospitable conditions of Southeast Asia. The 227th would also find the weather and altitude could be just as dangerous as the enemy. Flight crews fought their way through dense cloud cover and struggled to hover and land with the lift-robbing combination of altitude, humidity, and high temperatures. In the 29 days of Operation Delaware, the 227th would fly over 14,000 sorties, deployed and extracted over 19,000 troopers, and won numerous awards, including a Silver Star, 20 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 26 Air Medals with Valor. In addition to its combat role, the 227th assisted in the rebuilding of war-torn South Vietnam, in many cases airlifting the first medical aid the Vietnamese people had ever received. On May 25, 1971, a second Medal of Honor was awarded a member of the 227th, when Major William E. Adams volunteered to rescue 3 wounded soldiers from a firebase under heavy attack in the province of Kon Tum. Knowing enemy anti-aircraft batteries surrounded the base, Major Adams flew his lightly armed Huey in to rescue the soldiers. Under gunship escort, Adams managed to land and load the wounded soldiers. As Major Adams departed the base, his aircraft was struck by enemy anti-aircraft fire and began descending. Despite Adams' valiant efforts to regain control of the Huey, his aircraft exploded before he could land. For his conspicuous gallantry and humanitarian regard for his fellow man, Major William E. Adams was awarded the Medal of Honor. After its tour was completed in 1971, the 227th returned from Vietnam to their new home in Fort Hood, Texas. While still a combat air mobile battalion, disaster relief was added to its duties. Combat training continued, shifting its focus toward Europe and the Soviet threat. For the next 12 years, the 227th would go through a period of reorganization and reassignments, all while continuing to improve and modernize its tactics and training. A major fork in the road occurred on October 1, 1983, when the 227th was redesignated the 228th Attack Helicopter Battalion. The battalion would receive its first 3 AH-64A Apache attack helicopters on March 9, 1987. 3 months later, June 16, 1987, the 228th became an official Apache-equipped unit and was redesignated the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment, 1st Attack. The 1st Battalion didn't have long to wait for their second baptism of fire with the newly acquired Apaches. On September 25, 1990, 1st Attack deployed to Southwest Asia in preparation for Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm. In the months leading up to the war, 1st Attack trained constantly with live-fire gunneries, Hellfire missile and rocket launching, 30mm gun and small arms practice. Day and night battle drills were rehearsed as 1st Attack prepared to fight and win. On the 25th of February 1991, the 1st of the 227th conducted a raid as part of the 1st Cavalry Division's deception plan to throw the Iraqi army off guard. 2 days and 200 miles later, the battalion was chasing the enemy, scurrying from their strongholds in Kuwait deep into Iraq, in what would become known as Desert Storm. The 227th's Apaches hit the enemy hard, destroying tanks, trucks, fuel tankers, mortar and artillery pieces. During the fight, an urgent call came in. We're hit, we're going down," was the commander of Charlie Company, Captain Mike Klingel, and his co-pilot gunner, Chief Warrant Officer 4, Mike Butler. A surface-to-air missile had hit the aircraft. Their wingman, 1st Lieutenant Robert Johnston, saw the crash and flew in with suppressing fire to halt the enemy, already advancing on the downed Apache. Klingel and Butler survived the crash and freed themselves from the cockpit. Johnston landed near the crash, and both Klingel and Butler ran toward the waiting Apache. The 2 crew members hooked themselves onto Johnston's Apache and were flown to safety using a technique known as the spur ride. The name spur ride comes from the cavalry technique where another rider could recover a trooper who lost his mount in combat. Today, the spur ride is a method of carrying an additional occupant on a helicopter designed for carrying 2 crew members. The rescued individual will hook on to the exterior of the helicopter using the D-rings on his safety harness and then flown to a safe location or nearest medical attention. Captain Klingel's was the only Apache lost to the 227th during the conflict. In November 1998, 1st Attack was first again as it became the first AH-64D Longbow Attack Helicopter Battalion in the world. Shortly after being activated, 1st Attack tested their skills against German air defense units during roving sands at Fort Bliss, Texas in late spring 1999. Shortly after returning home, the unit would provide observer controllers to aid in the certification of the 2nd Longbow unit to be fielded, while simultaneously supporting 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Brigade during the 3-Corps Warfighter exercise in December of that same year. January 2003 saw 1st Attack deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom 1. Attached to the 11th Aviation Regiment, the battalion planned and executed an attack deep in Iraq to destroy the Medina Division of the Republican Guard and enable the 3rd Infantry Division freedom to maneuver north and seize Baghdad. On the night of March 23, 2003, 1st Attack launched north. Flying through a wall of enemy gunfire and anti-aircraft artillery, only one of the battalion's Apaches managed to escape unharmed. The rest of the aircraft were so heavily damaged, they required major repairs before they could return to battle. During the intense fight, one aircraft was shot down, piloted by Chief Warrant Officer 2 David Williams and co-pilot gunner Chief Warrant Officer 2 Ronald Young, Jr. Despite efforts to avoid the enemy, Iraqi forces captured the crew. The rest of the battalion managed to fly their damaged aircraft back to Tactical Assembly Area RAMs. Maintainers from D Company's Bone Crushers immediately went to work repairing or replacing battle-damaged parts while the whole battalion waited for word of their missing brothers. During their captivity, Williams and Young were moved constantly as coalition troops continued to advance on Iraqi forces. The 2 were often held in locations right in the middle of the ensuing battle. After a harrowing 22 days in captivity, Williams and Young were finally rescued by ground forces closing in on Baghdad. The unit returned home to Fort Hood in June 2003. Shortly after arriving, the entire chain of command was restructured, and the unit went to work repairing the still heavily damaged Lot 4 Longbow aircraft. Simultaneously, the Division Cavalry Aviation units, assigned to 1st Squadron 7th Cavalry, Gary Owen, flying the OH-58D Kiowa Warrior, joined with the 1st of the 227th to become Task Force 1227. Preparation for Operation Iraqi Freedom 2 was underway. In the summer of 2003, the task force acquired new Lot 7 aircraft, conducted 4 gunneries, and went through detailed air, ground, and close combat training at the Combat Readiness Training Centers in Louisiana and California. In February of 2004, deploying 20 miles north of Baghdad in Taji, Iraq, the task force conducted combat operations in support of the Multinational Corps Iraq and the 1st Cavalry Division. Their goal was to complete the transition of sovereignty from the Hussein regime to the Iraqi people. Flying over 10,000 hours in Apaches and 9,000 hours in Kiowa Warriors, Task Force Attack answered every call and supported operations throughout the theater, from Baghdad to An-Najaf to Al-Qut. It was Easter Sunday, April 11, 2004, when 6 tankers filled with 32,000 gallons of JP-8 fuel were on their way to supply Marines surrounding the city of Fallujah. En route to their destination, soldiers of the 706th Transportation Company found themselves in what one soldier would call the worst ambush they had ever seen or heard of. A mile-long kill zone had enveloped the convoy with increasing small arms and mortar fire. A frantic unit distress call was made by convoy commander, Staff Sergeant Robert Williamson, on the sheriff frequency. Chief Warrant Officer 3, Chuck Fortenberry, and Chief Warrant Officer 2, Shane Colton, call sign Bear Trap 36, along with their wingman, overheard the call. Within 2 minutes, Bear Trap 36 flew from their forward area refueling point to engage the enemy at the kill zone. After an hour of relentless attack, NCOs of the 706th got the help they needed: 2 inbound Apache longbows. Receiving direction from Williamson, the 1st Apache focused its 30mm gun on occupants of a house to the southwest who were pinning down the convoy with heavy, accurate fire. Multiple bursts of 30mm rounds turned the adobe house into a puff of dust. 2nd Squad Leader Staff Sergeant Rowe would recall, everywhere the Apaches flew, the firing stopped. If they were over an area, people had their heads down and weren't shooting at us. As Staff Sergeant Williamson recounted, "When I heard the Apaches, all I could think of was, thank God, I am going to live." Under the Apaches' cover, the convoy was beginning to move out when Williamson heard a loud, sharp crack rip through the air, a sound he would never forget. Williamson looked over his shoulder to see Bear Trap 36 sink in the air as debris flew from the mortally wounded aircraft. The main rotor blades folded and the tail boom crumpled. The aircraft fell to earth and exploded. Staff Sergeant Rowe recalls, for almost 30 seconds, there was not a sound. No one fired, not us, not the Iraqis. As the soldiers of the 706 watched the crash in disbelief, the M2 Bradleys and Humvees from Sheriff finally arrived and secured the site. All 6 fuel tankers had been disabled. 5 soldiers were evacuated and 13 soldiers drove their vehicles back despite their wounds. "Those Apaches saved our lives, no question about it," explained Staff Sergeant LeMay. "Were it not for the bravery of CW3 Chuck Fortenberry and CW2 Shane Colton, the toll would have been significantly higher. And it was because of sacrifices like Fortenberry's and Colton's that the task force was awarded the Navy Unit Commendation for its role in the Second Battle of Fallujah in November 2004. The 1st of the 227th also won the LSD Parker Award for Best Combat Aviation Unit in the Army. After 13 months of continuous operations, the task force returned to Fort Hood in March 2005. 1st Attack's 3rd deployment to Iraq in September 2006 would find the battalion facing the proverbial hornet's nest, supporting Operation Iraqi Freedom 0608. Al-Qaeda-fueled violence was threatening to tear the country apart as the nation's Sunni and Shiite militias battled each other for control. Tribal divisions added to the already heated conflict. Ground zero for this violence was the capital city of Baghdad. A newly developed strategy, the counterinsurgency doctrine, would form the blueprint for quelling the violence, and it would fall on 1st Attack to give ground forces the cover they needed to execute the new clear, hold, and build tactic. Based once again out of Camp Taji, the unit would support up to 8 separate combat brigades on a daily basis. In 15 months of deployment, the battalion engaged in over 300 separate firefights, earning multiple awards and citations for its aggressiveness and valor on the battlefield in what would be known as the Surge. During the Surge, 1 Distinguished Service Cross, 13 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 41 Bronze Stars, and more than 15 Air Medals with Valor were awarded to members of 1st Attack. A number of those awards would be for events of a single day. On the morning of February 19, 2007, a truck loaded with more than 1,000 pounds of explosives blew through the front gate of Joint Security Station North in the town of Tarmilla. The blast killed 2 soldiers outright and severely wounded several others. The station's walls had been breached, and the outpost was receiving small arms and RPG fire from all directions. An Apache team responded to the attack, led by Chief Warrant Officer 3 Brian Haas and Air Mission Commander 1st Lieutenant Brian Haas. That's right, 2 guys in the same bird with the same name. Flying wing position were Captain Michael Hudson and co-pilot gunner Chief Warrant Officer 2 Eric Hoskinson. Upon arrival, the team set about determining the source of enemy fire. The enemy's focus quickly moved from the station to the Apaches. The lead Apache took multiple hits, including an anti-aircraft round in the tail rotor gearbox, but managed to stay in the fight.
We might have just got tagged in our tail.
Circling the battle, the lead Apache spotted a motorcycle fleeing an area, delivering heavy fire on the station. As the Apaches tracked the motorcycle, Captain Hudson's Apache began taking intense ground fire. A 12.7mm Dishka machine gun round hit underneath the aircraft, splintering and injuring Hoskinson's legs and cracking the canopy above, obstructing Hudson's view. Hoskinson shouted that they were descending rapidly and made a mayday call. Answering the call were Pilot Chief Warrant Officer 3 Matt Skyver and co-pilot gunner 1st Lieutenant Clint Burleson in their lead Apache. Flying wing were Pilot Chief Warrant Officer 2 Micah Johnson and co-pilot gunner Chief Warrant Officer 2 Troy Mosley. Captain Hudson managed to stabilize his damaged Apache, but was told by the other Apache in his team that his wing weapon stores were on fire.
Jettison your rocket pod. It looks like your rockets are on fire.
Seeing his rockets begin to cook off, Hudson punched off the stores and, with guidance from his wounded co-pilot, made his way toward Taji Airfield.
All right, you're looking good right now. You're looking good, Mike.
Verifying Hudson's ability to return to base, the relief Apache team quickly began searching for the source of ground fire, which damaged the previous team's aircraft.
Sounds like we're taking fire.
Johnson immediately began maneuvering to avoid the lethal rounds. A low hydraulics level light appeared on Johnson's cockpit display. The aircraft was taking hits to its wings' electrical systems, creating a failure in a Hellfire missile launcher and disabling their 2.75-inch rockets. Johnson's lead aircraft spotted fluid leaking over the stabilator, but seeing that all other hydraulic pressure gauges read normal, Johnson and Mosley elected to stay in the fight until relief could arrive. Medevac was beginning to arrive, and the Apache team flew cover while wounded were loaded on the waiting Blackhawks. Ground forces began reporting fire from a building 100 meters south of the security station. Johnson took a north to south run, engaging the building and the area south with his 30mm gun. As the team was assessing damage to the building, ground forces reported receiving fire from the top of a building to their north. The team turned to engage the north building with 2 passes of 30mm fire. The team's second pass on the building set off secondary explosions of an enemy munitions cache. Relief soon arrived for a battle handover, and Johnson returned with his team to Taji. It was discovered that Johnson's aircraft sustained small arms damage along the wings, in a rotor blade, and along the tail. One bullet had severed a hydraulic return line to the tail rotor, causing the cockpit warning light. Johnson and Mosley jumped into a backup aircraft, and the team returned to Tarmilla, searching for the weapons pylons Hudson was forced to jettison earlier. While searching, the team was informed that the Joint Security Station was receiving fire again. Ground forces would mark the source of incoming rounds with .50 caliber tracer fire. The team followed the tracers and opened up with their 30mm guns, silencing the deadly incoming fire. A second Apache team soon relieved Johnson and Mosley's team, and they returned to Taji. For that day in February, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Brian Haas, 1st Lieutenant Brian Haas, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Micah Johnson, and Chief Warrant Officer 2 Troy Mosley were all awarded the Air Medal with Valor. Chief Warrant Officer 3 Matt Skyver and 1st Lieutenant Clint Burleson were presented with Air Medals. Chief Warrant Officer 2 Eric Hoskinson was presented with the Purple Heart for his injuries. Both Captain Michael Hudson and Chief Warrant Officer 2 Eric Hoskinson were presented with Air Medals with Valor, and Captain Hudson also won the Broken Wing Award for safely returning his crippled aircraft back to Taji. In the first of the 227th, heroic actions weren't confined to the cockpit. as proven by specialists Joseph Baker, Benjamin DeVilla Jr., and Aaron Sims, members of D Company's Bone Crushers. On March 10, 2007, a returning Apache had been damaged and the pilot wounded by heavy enemy fire. A rocket in one of the aircraft's rocket pods had been struck by a bullet, causing it to fire and fuse itself inside the pod along with another rocket. The three soldiers quickly donned their body armor and raced to the pod. Knowing the life-threatening potential of the smoldering pod, the soldiers carefully removed the pod and took it to an explosive ordnance disposal team 50 meters away. The three soldiers' actions prevented any further injuries or damage to the aircraft. For their bravery, specialists Joseph Baker, Benjamin DeVilla Jr., and Aaron Sims were awarded the Army Commendation Medal with Valor. The commander of the 1st Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cavalry Division, said it best when summing up the battalion's support of his soldiers. When we need security, First Attack is there. The pilots of 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment are totally fearless and have never failed to support us no matter what the conditions. Under the protection of First Attack, ground forces seized the upper hand, and by 2008, violence in Iraq would fall 60%, a testament to the counterinsurgency tactics and to the tenacious fighting spirit of First Attack. In December of 2007, the battalion returned to Fort Hood, beginning preparations for its next deployment. 16 months later, in April 2009, the battalion returned to Camp Taji in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom 0910. Operating in support of Multinational Division Baghdad, First Attack had an attack weapons team in the air or on standby 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the duration of the deployment. The battalion supported diverse operations, ranging from convoy security to operating as an unconventional intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platform for Special Operations Forces. For its actions during this deployment, the unit was presented with the Army Meritorious Unit Award. The battalion would return to Fort Hood in May 2010, where it immediately began training for a new mission in a much different environment, Afghanistan. First Attack deployed to Fort Carson, Colorado, and received special training for the coming assignment at the U.S. Army High Altitude Mountain Environmental Training Site, or HAMMET. The battalion once again became a task force, receiving the UH-60 crews from B Company 3rd Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment, and sending the Reapers of B Company 1st of the 227th to Task Force Lobo, 2nd Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment for the duration of the deployment. In June of 2011, Task Force Attack departed Fort Hood for Afghanistan. During its 12-month deployment, the task force would face an entirely new set of challenges brought on by the worst Afghan winter in over 30 years. Snow measured in feet and constant freezing temperatures would prove demanding obstacles, which the task force would overcome with their legendary Pauvoir attitude and ingenuity. Among its many accomplishments, Task Force Attack would participate in over 100 enemy engagements, fly over 20,000 hours in the rugged, unforgiving environment, assist in taking out or capturing 117 of Afghanistan's most wanted, and remove 570 detainees from the battlefield, all while completely avoiding civilian casualties and collateral damage. In July of 2011, Task Force Attack participated in the largest Special Operations Forces battle of the Afghan War. Attack weapons teams actively engaged enemy strongholds with precision-guided Hellfire missiles, allowing ground forces freedom to maneuver and destroy over 100 heavily prepared and armed enemy combatants. The battle was a crushing defeat for the insurgents and greatly reduced the insurgency's influence in eastern Afghanistan. From the battlefields of Opequon and Nashville, where the U.S. cavalry was born, to the hard-fought battles of Pleiku and Khe Sanh, Baghdad, An-Najaf, and Al-Qut, to the snow-covered mountains of Afghanistan, the 1st Battalion of the 227th Aviation Regiment stands proud of its legendary history and committed to lead Army Aviation and 1st Cavalry Division throughout the 21st century. Attack! Halfway down the trail to hell, in a shady meadow green, are the souls of all dead troopers camped near a good old-time canteen. And this eternal resting place is known as Fiddler's Green. Marching past, straight through to hell, the infantry are seen, accompanied by the engineers, artillery, and Marines, for none but the shades of cavalrymen dismount at Fiddler's Green. Though some go curving down the trail to seek a warmer scene, no trooper ever gets to hell ere he's emptied his canteen, and so rides back to drink again with friends at Fiddler's Green. And so when man and horse go down beneath a saber keen, or in a roaring charge of fierce melee, you stop a bullet clean, and the hostiles come to get your scalp, just empty your canteen and put your pistol to your head and go to Fiddler's Green.
Roger that. Probably no need of a show of force anymore. We got the crazy horse element out here, and these guys are terrified of them. So I have a feeling we showed enough.